Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Jacobson, and I serve as Acting Director at American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And I'm so thrilled that you've all chosen to join us today for our ASAP Policy Practice Group conversation with Marissa McInnis, the Director for Climate Adaptation at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. So Marissa is going to be with us until 1:30 p.m. Eastern time today. We are so grateful for the time that she's able to give us today. She'll be sharing some remarks, and we have some predetermined questions for her. We'll have Angie Hacker in conversation with Marissa. And afterwards, we will have an opportunity for folks to join small groups to share their own reflections on Marissa's remarks and next steps for how ASAP members and the ASAP network can take action. As we get started, I'd love if everyone could put their introduction in the chat. So tell us who you are, where you're located. We'd love if you'd like to share a land acknowledgement as well. If you have an affiliation you'd like to share, pronouns, if you'd like to share them as well. And for today's discussion, feel free to have your video on or off as whatever is most comfortable for you. But very importantly, please do remain muted when you're not speaking. And our conversation today is hosted by ASAP's Policy Practice Group, which is one of a dozen peer learning groups that ASAP supports within our ASAP Connects program area. And if everyone could please make sure that they're muted, that would be wonderful. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So the Policy Practice Group leads ASAP's efforts to advocate for transformational adaptation policy at all scales of government. And I'll share more about how and why we're doing that a little bit later. But for now, I'd just like to take a minute to acknowledge our incredible Policy Practice Group leadership team. Angie Hacker, Amy Rapp, Gavin Dillingham, John Phillips, Joel Smith, Anna McGinn, David Dodd, Emma Tipton, Josh Foster. Oh, Gavin, you made it on here twice. Laura Whiteley-Binder and Shannon Burke, and the fantastic ASAP staff team, Brianna Nails, Kyla Boyer, Megan Putnam, and Jeff Fournier. The guideposts for ASAP's policy work are our 6 policy priorities, which we'll cover a bit more in depth later today. But I'll draw your attention to the reason that we're here today, which is policy priority number 6, establishing government-wide coordination and lasting authority to enact, act on, and evaluate progress on climate resilience priorities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Policy Practice Group leader Angie Hacker to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you today. I'm Angie Hacker with Prosper Sustainably, and more importantly, I am a leadership member of the PPG team, the Policy Practices Group. So I want to thank all the members of that group for helping us prepare for today's meeting. And my job is to help us have a really good conversation with our guests today, and I'm really honored to introduce her. So Marissa McInnis currently serves as Director for Climate Adaptation in the Council on Environmental Quality in the White House, where she co-leads the federal climate adaptation portfolio, providing oversight and expertise on resilience metrics and climate training. In previous roles, she has served as the U.S. Department of Defense Director for Climate and Water Resilience. She's also served as Climate Change and Sustainability Lead with the Department of the Navy, and as First Senior Sustainability Officer for Climate Preparedness with the White House, and in various roles over a decade at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She received a Master of Science in Environmental Science and Policy from Johns Hopkins University and bachelor's degrees from Maryville College. So with that, I want to say, Marissa, thank you so much for agreeing to come talk to adaptation professionals from across the country today. We so appreciate your time and work. So you get to take it away from here and tell us a little bit about your team and your priorities, and then we're going to have a moderated Q&A. Unfortunately, Marissa is going to have to leave us at 1:30, so we're going to have a moderated discussion, and then we're going to have a time afterwards to reflect. So Marissa, take it away. Thanks again.
Thank you, Angie. Thanks so much, Angie and Rachel. It's really great to be here. I've had a great relationship with ASAP over the years. And so, and earlier, I think fall last year, I came by to talk to a smaller group. So this is really fantastic. Thanks for coming on a Friday afternoon. So I wanted to just quickly, I know we're short on time here and I unfortunately have to leave at 1:30, but wanted to give you some context about where I sit and what's happening currently within the federal climate adaptation portfolio here at CEQ. So I co-lead along with Lori Carey-Kuthera from NOAA, the federal climate adaptation portfolio, and that consists of several large pieces. So under Executive Order 14008, agencies were directed to develop climate adaptation plans. These first came out, I'm sure most of you are aware of this if you've been following this closely, in October of 21. The progress reports for that work came out a year later, October 22. And now what we're working on with agencies is really looking at the next iteration of what those climate adaptation plans are going to look like, along with at the same time, really helping to lift up what the agencies have been doing on federal climate adaptation, look at training leveraging opportunities where I think there's a lot of work that ASAP can continue to do in partnership with the federal government on, and then thinking about how we measure and how we look at either key performance indicators, how we measure across both the administration and at an agency level, how we measure our progress on adaptation work. And as you all know, a lot of that it is really tricky to target. So working hand in hand with the federal agencies on that. And so that's kind of the overview, of what our portfolio contains. We co-lead, me and Lori Carey-Kuthera co-lead a group called the Federal Climate Adaptation Planning Network. And it's made up of about 27 agencies and probably 70 people come every other week. And these are the folks that are basically on the hook for producing the climate adaptation plans and also implementing them. So it's a real community of practice, and similar to what ASAP provides, you all have a really robust set of training and resources and people to really kind of reach across and talk to. We want to do that same thing in a targeted setting of the federal climate adaptation community. And so that's really taken off. We started that last March. So we've been operating the network for about a year, and it's been really effective. Additionally, we've done a couple of things focused on training specifically. We developed a really targeted training. We're looking at, not just the broad agency as a whole. We're really targeting the people within the agencies that make decisions. So think about budget decisions, think about HR decisions, think about procurement acquisition decisions. We want to make sure that those folks are aware of where they're exposed to climate hazards and what they can do to better make their agencies more climate ready. And so we developed at the end of last year a training with the Federal Acquisition Institute, really targeted for acquisition managers, and walking them through where they're able to see their climate risk and what they can do about it. To date, I think we targeted for a total of about 1,500 people within the federal government to take it. I think we've had about 700 people take it total. So we're really looking at these targeted approaches are really taking off, and we want to look at other areas where we can really kind of scope things specifically for the decision makers within the government. The other big thing that we've been working on is metrics, and thinking about pulling in outside experts. And I saw a few of them on that first slide that Rachel showed with the members of ASAP. So thinking about, what's been done external to federal government, what's already happening within the federal family in terms of measurement and adaptation, thinking about return on investment, things like that we already know, and then really trying to decide what makes the most sense to baseline where we're at right now, where are we currently exposed, where are we currently vulnerable, and then developing implementation plans to help reduce that risk. And so that's kind of the overview of where we are, and just thinking about timeline. We have right now. We're working on the new template, so the new iteration of the guide, the instructions for the climate adaptation plans that should come out hopefully within, the next month. And then at the same time, continuing to create standardized metrics and training that can help implement that new guidance. And then we really want to continue to grow the community of practice. And I know that's something we're going to talk about later today with Angie. And I can see a lot of potential for partnership there. So with that, I'll stop and turn it back over to you, Angie.
Thank you, Marissa. That was a great overview. And I'm just really glad you're here today because, gosh, ASAP would really love to partner and collaborate with you on a lot of those priorities you mentioned. So let's go ahead and get into some of our questions. Our first questions, and again, thanks to the PPG folks that helped us design these questions. A lot of us have been working in adaptation for a while and are really grateful to see this administration and folks like you as the first director of climate adaptation promoting significant investment in action and adaptation and equity. And I just wanted to invite you to how would you characterize the status of federal adaptation today versus the past?
Yeah, and I think, versus the past, you could take that in several different approaches. And I was here at the end of the Obama administration in a similar role. And when a lot of that work was really kind of being grounded in 2012, when the initial federal agencies had climate adaptation plans developed, a lot of that work under the Obama administration was built off of it. And now bringing that back together, reconvening the community of practice, the federal community of practice, and building on all that work and actually seeing where a lot of agencies have moved. I originally come from Department of Defense, and a lot of agencies have continued to move in that climate readiness space over the past few years. So there's so much work that has to be done, and you all are in the adaptation space. That it's iterative, and we had a great start with the initial plans. We're looking to make the next iteration of plans even stronger and more bold, and being able to see a picture across federal government. So really figuring out how to acknowledging that all agencies are very different. They have very different missions. They have very different federal assets and portfolios, but trying to figure out how to see them across so that we can really start to help assist agencies with that implementation. So I say it's, there is a lot happening right now, and I'm really excited about the work that's happening, not only within the White House, but at the agencies as well. So working across my colleagues at OMB and OSTP and other parts of CEQ, it's just a lot happening at once. So.
Yeah, well, let's dive in a little bit more on some of these issues. And, we know that in your role, you must be the lead on a lot of tricky issues. And a lot of our members have brought up, some of the trickier issues like managed retreat and protecting health. And there's a lot of them in the adaptation space that require coordinated implementation among many federal agencies, most of which are in the infancy of determining how to manage and mitigate climate impacts. So can you tell us more about how is the federal government building capacity and ensuring effective coordination among agencies? And you told us a little bit about that. Maybe you can dive in a little bit more about what are some of those challenges?
Yeah. And I'll just say that, it is definitely not only me at the White House doing climate adaptation. There's a group of us here that are working on that and working on issues like, community-driven relocation, and environmental justice, and topics that agencies maybe haven't been used to working on and putting in their plans, but are getting as much kind of hands-on help as we can. So I think I mentioned the FCAP network, and I think that's one place where we have seen leveraging across the agencies a ton of resources, a ton of expertise. We've been lucky to have Rachel come to the group and talk about what ASAP is doing and the resources that you all have and what you've been working on. And then we ask, we do regular polling of the network and say, what are you struggling with? And, we had progress reports and we had a template form for them to fill out. We wanted to make it as easy as we could for the agencies to really showcase their work. And there were still, some areas where they just weren't, used to kind of dealing with. And at the same time, a lot of these folks at agencies are sometimes facilities folks that also have adaptation hats on, right? So you're really trying to do some education, especially the smaller agencies, some education at the same time as, driving them to the right people within their agencies. So we've had workshops on Indigenous knowledge. We've had workshops on EJ, on scenario planning. At a huge benefit of being at the White House is you have this convening power and you have access to these people who really, write the book on what we should, guidance for what the agency should be doing on a lot of these topics. And so that's been really helpful to bring that to the agency leads. And, we're going to continue to build on that.
And so in addition to the capacity building and training and convening, we were hoping you could dive in more too into what mechanisms are in place to ensure accountability across states, federal agencies, and future administrations, and how might mechanisms ensure changes in climate are incorporated into building and rebuilding infrastructure. And folks are in our group are telling us, how do we not build past climate conditions?
Yeah, so I need to caveat that my focus is federal. So yeah. I know, it's definitely separate from obviously agencies like Department of Transportation and most agencies have a state profile that they work with, a state office. But my portfolio deals strictly with federal. So in terms of, what we're doing, especially with the recent funding that's been given out or in the process of being given out to states and projects across the country via IRA and BIL, there is a Climate Smart Infrastructure Working Group in place that is led by senior leadership at the White House, and it's also co-led by OMB. I participate in that infrastructure working group, and a lot of the best minds from the federal agencies do as well. And so we're really looking at, how do we screen and how do we make sure that where we're investing is really building capacity and not maladaptive in any way. I think there's always kind of an education part to this work where you have a lot of folks that have come into the climate space from a mitigation side, emissions reductions focused, and kind of, having that education and discussion with that side of the climate world and sharing co-benefits, all the co-benefit work that could come out of it, but also, we need to do the adaptation work as well at the same time as we're doing the emissions reduction. So it's been really good to see that exchange and discussion happen at the senior levels, in these working groups that are really targeted and directed by the president to come up with, here's how we need to divvy out this, at least ensure that there's climate ready building with the infrastructure money that's coming out.
Do you want to touch on a little bit more just some of these mechanisms? So, there's some accountability mechanisms, and it comes from our policy priorities where that's one of the things we've highlighted as something that we would kind of like to help think into. And I imagine it's challenging as we're trying to move the federal government in this direction. Could you dive in a little bit more on the challenges around building accountable mechanisms?
Yeah, so I think, and we hit on this earlier too, with this discussion around metrics and how to measure progress at the same time, how to screen exposure, and then at the same time how to measure progress at the end of the adaptation planning process. So it's agencies, and speaking from a federal standpoint, not speaking to the state and local standpoint here, but from an agency perspective, they all have different missions. Like DoD has a different mission than EPA, they're regulatory, smaller agencies like Department of Labor, we work really intensely with, and they don't have 500 buildings like some of the other agencies have. So their facilities and their assets and portfolio is it is really kind of tailored to their needs. And so we want to focus on, as the resources are given out, let's make sure and screen on the front end. Is this climate smart? Is this climate ready? Is this going to result in this federal agency being more climate ready? And so that's where we really need to focus, kind of embedding that screen, so that it's not something that you have to think about, at the end of an award, but it should be on the front end. And coming from DoD, that's done in several different ways. And I won't get into the nitty gritty here, but there's certain forms that have to be filled out before military construction happens. There's lots of, if you're in a floodplain, you have to check that box, and then also have some type of plan, to mitigate that risk. And so there are lots of steps that are already really being done throughout government that, maybe smaller agencies haven't been able to do as well. And so by bringing together this Climate Smart Infrastructure Working Group and other, mechanisms within the administration, that's supposed to kind of make that more consistent across the agencies.
Yeah, and it really would be interesting to see how some of those practices do translate down to the state level. As
Right.
funds flow to the state, it sounds like there's a real relationship there where some similar mechanisms can work. And, I think we agree with you about some upfront mechanisms can really be helpful there before the funds are distributed.
Right.
Okay, so our next question is, what new approaches to federal adaptation policy planning and funding, subject to this funding issue, can adaptation professionals look forward to in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so obviously I can't make any promises about what's going to happen and what legislation can go through. I think right now there's a lot of work that's being wrapped up on training. And I think, the example I gave earlier about the really targeted training, that is something that we're looking at across the federal government, how we could better institutionalize climate adaptation as, something that maybe is put into job announcements, a type of job descriptions, like thinking about how to institutionalize that from the federal standpoint. And then I think the other big piece, there's a big push right now. I started the resilience metrics work probably a year ago and have been, pulling in expertise from across. But, every time that I mention it to someone I work with at the White House or at an agency, they say, yeah, we need to do that. We're really interested in that. Like, we really want to participate with you in that. And so I think that's kind of a field that's of peak interest right now, and that could result in some great change in terms of how we really measure adaptation and our progress. And then the final thing is, I think that there's a lot of, we talked about BIL and IRA, and I think just from my experience as a federal adaptation lead at various agencies, the budget connection is often really hard to make versus other parts of the climate portfolio. And so we've seen a real interest from OMB and other parts of the White House and Department of Treasury on, we had Executive Order 14030 come out on a climate financial risk. There's also a huge need to continue to marry the budget and adaptation work together. So I think a lot of the work has been not understood why it would need to be funded in the past. And so I think building that case for our risk and our exposure, and then at the same time, how to prioritize federal needs and to tie that to the budget process, that's something that could happen in the next 2 years. And I would be so happy and pleased to see if it did.
Yeah, great. And thank you. And we want to just reiterate our appreciation for, we can recognize the collaborative engagement with adaptation professionals in the industry. Thank you for doing that work. Our final question before we know we have to lose you is how ASAP PP or the policy practices group, and how can we collaborate with you on these shared priorities, and how can we better support your office?
Yeah, so I mean, I heard at the front of the conversation that there's over 45 organizations, so that's a lot. So represented by ASAP. So I think that, I mentioned some things that you can look for probably within the next calendar year that are going to be rolling out. So there is something like I work with federal agencies only. A lot of other parts of the White House work with state and local, like you said, Angie. So so helping to be that bridge, I think, between federal and local, or wherever your entities are, I think that's going to be really, really key to getting this money where it needs to be, and also the technical capability where it needs to be. And then you all have been doing amazing work on training specifically. So I think that's a space where there's going to be a lot of interest in the next 2 years and ability for you all to partner. And then I think, the last thing is, having like the conversations around, like, so much of my work is in the education front. It's like the climate literacy front, and it's talking about a lot of folks can get wrapped around what RCP are we using, and what why are we using this timeline and not that timeline, and I think that's really easy to do, but to really kind of plain language it for people that aren't in the climate world, that we're here in terms of risk, like we're exposed in these places. We need to prioritize where we invest so that we can have, so that we can continue operations, so that we can continue to protect our assets. And I think that that's the argument that's really spoken the most directly to, people that I've worked with. And so I just encourage you all to, continue to lift up that message specifically, so that the conversation needs to be had. And I'll just say, a lot of times, I've had folks that work in the climate world, come to me and say, oh, you're the doomsday person, you're the adaptation person. And so I think that we get that label a lot. So I think we need to continue to, and we understand that, right, why people would say that, but to turn that around so that it's like, no, we are understanding that we need to do both, and that we really need to protect, the communities and the people and the places that we love as much as we can. And this is how we're going to do that. So, let's be proactive in that. So I feel like that conversation, as much as your members can have, really helps the cause overall.
Well, wonderful. I feel like there's so much more engagement, and I'm really glad that I'm just happy to see you at the helm, happy that you're here, and really happy that Rachel and others in ASAP are going to continue to engage. We're happy to support as much as we can. And so thank you again for your time. And I am actually going to hand it back over to Rachel now.
Thank you, everyone.
Marissa, thank you so much for being with us. We're really, really incredibly grateful. Okay, so moving forward, let's give just one last round of applause and thanks to Marissa. We can get that gratitude going in the chat. That would be wonderful. Thank you all for all of your questions. We will definitely be passing these questions on to Marissa's office. So if she's able to share any answers in writing, we will absolutely be sharing that out with everyone who's in the room today. But as I mentioned earlier, the policy practice group at ASAP leads our efforts to advocate for transformational adaptation policy at all scales of government. And as we move into our small group discussions, I want to take this opportunity to share a bit about why and how we do that. So as we work to move the needle on adaptation policy here at ASAP, we are driving towards 5 key desired outcomes that you can see on the left-hand side of your slide. Consistent use of publicly available, vetted, regionally relevant climate data and information, particularly future climate data information where it's appropriate. A strong enabling environment for members to implement the principles of quality adaptation in their work, and an enabling environment through a strong market for adaptation jobs. A shifting understanding of risk, as evidenced by a shift in the balance of policies designed to rebuild in exposed places versus getting out of harm's way, and policies that prohibit maladaptation. Consistent acknowledgement of the historical conditions that have forced people into climate vulnerability and rectification of those conditions, particularly through funding, enabling both adaptation in place and, again, moving out of harm's way. And a holistic narrative of climate action that is inclusive of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, and government programs that enable and fund them equally. And you can see here on the right-hand side of the slide some of the incredible work that ASAP members have undertaken together to drive progress towards those outcomes, sharing our expertise and insights at all levels of government and multiple contexts and adaptation topics. And as we do this work, we are staying grounded in our current policy priorities to meet the moment we're in with respect to adaptation policy. And those priorities are establish standards for climate data and require use of future climate information, prioritize justice and equity in all aspects of climate resilience investment, require all physical and social infrastructure decisions to consider future climate conditions, heal and protect nature to build climate resilience, invest in defining, developing, and training the climate adaptation and climate resilience workforce. And then, of course, policy priority number 6 that we have been discussing today, establish government-wide coordination and lasting authority to enact, act on, and evaluate progress on climate resilience priorities. And over the past year, we've been working towards creating action plans for each priority to provide guidance on how ASAP members and our network as a whole can drive change in these key areas. And of course, we've just had an incredible conversation focused on policy priority number 6. And now we have the opportunity to digest that a little bit and move into outlining our action plan for this priority. So to introduce this activity, I'm going to turn it back over to Angie.
Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, we appreciate the questions in the chat, and now we get to chat with each other directly in Breakout. So let me prompt this discussion a little bit by sharing that at ASAP, we follow the Chatham House rules. That basically means that what is said in our meeting may be shared outside this room, but please be sure to get permission from a speaker before attributing it to them. So you can share ideas, but please don't attribute information to a speaker without their permission. So that's one of our milestone rules here. Let's go ahead and talk about the prompts. So, you heard from Marissa, probably have a lot of thoughts. We just want you to take an opportunity to reflect and digest, process those thoughts together in a breakout in whatever way you see fit. And then, because this is the policy practices group and we are thinking into our next step, what can we do to advance this policy priority number 6 further? We want to ask you for your input. How should ASAP and its members influence action on policy priority 6 in the coming year? So here's policy priority 6 over there on the right in its full text. We're going to actually, maybe Brianna, now would be a good time to link over to the document that you all can use in your breakouts with these discussion prompts, and it also includes this box on policy priority 6. So you really get the full picture of what it is we're trying to work towards in policy priority 6, which is about establishing government-wide coordination and lasting authority. And I want to hear from you too. So these action plans we create, it's, how do we focus on a policy environment? What can we do to influence policy? Some of that can come from good ideas from what's happening around the country. So we're wanting to ask you, what policy practices have you seen work well to establish government-wide coordination and lasting authority on climate resilience priorities in any scale of government? So you might have seen something really good happen in a local government, state, various scales. We want to hear about those. And so there's this document that you're free to share within. So we're going to go out into breakouts for 15 minutes. And we're going to ask you to put notes in this shared document and talk amongst yourselves. After that, we're going to spend a few minutes inviting whoever feels very compelled with a really, some interesting context from your group to share. We're not going to go around all the breakout groups, but we do want to invite you to share some of the most insightful things that came out of your group. So that's what we'll do next. And so Brianna, I think you're going to go ahead and break us out into our breakout groups, and we will see you all in 15 minutes. You need to write these comments into the notes that we provided. It's a shared document. We're not closing it out anytime soon. I think the thing that takes a little extra time sometimes is some of these examples. I was starting to hear really good examples in my group from around the country, like, here's what we're doing. Here's what I've seen work really well. It could be local, state, federal, whatever you've seen, drop it in, the link there. We're going to collect these and continue to work on our action plan. So with that, I wanted to give a couple minutes here just for folks who feel really compelled to share something really insightful that came out or something that they feel is really important to share in the full group. And you can raise your hand, would be a great way to do it. Joel, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. So I'll just offer an observation that I think first, Marissa's very impressive, and it's really good to see someone like that in her position. I still worry that it's her job is herding cats. It's not clear how much control the White House really has. As she said, each agency has their mission, and that's fine, and we're trying to work together. But I do worry that, there's so many overlapping responsibilities and water and so many other areas, and can agencies, first, how do you make sure the laggards are keeping up? Second, how do you, ensure that we're not instituting inconsistent, if not contradictory policies? I would like to see a stronger hand from the White House, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. I'll just offer that observation.
Thanks, Joel. Encourage anybody else to raise your hand and with any major insights coming from your group. We did talk a little bit about accountability measures, sort of the balance of narratives, the right messaging on the front end to encourage advancing these issues versus how can the White House, with all the executive power it has, actually establish accountability on the back end in some cases with metrics and reporting, and just getting into those details. Who else would like to share in the full group? I do see folks have in the third section, some folks are really adding some great examples here and with links. So I'm really appreciating that. I'm going to be the one to take the lead on an action plan after this, where we are going to be sort of taking inventory. When we do that, we take inventory of best practices. It really helps us to construct and borrow some recommendations that we can push along to folks like Marissa.
Angie,
I think I see Ellie's
hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes.
Eleanor and then Honora.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone.
Go ahead, Eleanor.
I'm Eleanor Perel from Ocean Conservancy. I know a bunch of people on this call. And one thing that we talked about in our group was that in terms of government-wide coordination, that there might be coordination with the core agencies that are in DC, but that there's also all of these adaptation regional offices like NOAA has and USGS has and EPA is standing up, and that there might be opportunities for better coordination in the regions where there are these kind of branches focused on adaptation. So in addition to what they're doing in the more like core DC area.
Thanks, Eleanor. And Honora.
Yes, I was in Joel's group, and I had brought up about the maladaptation, and we also had mentioned the Corps of Engineers as sort of a prime example of some of that. But I think it's important for us to not only say what we want, but what we don't want in adaptation, because here in Louisiana, I know they're really pushing carbon capture and storage as a big solution for the whole country, which basically is a huge environmental justice and polluting issue here in Louisiana. So that's an example of avoiding some of these maladaptations. And also we talked about focusing on nature-based solutions and getting more clarity on what that entails. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, I don't see any other hands raised, and that's okay. We got a lot of good input in the document. It's a good time for me to hand things back over to Rachel, who's going to close us out. Thank you everybody for taking the time to share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Angie, for facilitating and organizing and leading this conversation, and to all of you for sharing all of your amazing insights. I'm really looking forward to seeing the action plan for policy priority number 6. All right, so of course the fun does not stop here, and we hope that you will join us for an upcoming policy practice group meeting. If you're registered for this meeting, then you will receive information about all future meetings which take place on the first Friday of each month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have a current opportunity to help us produce an additional output besides our action plan, and that is we are going to be submitting a response to an EPA request for information for public input on new and innovative strategies and approaches for competition, design, community engagement, equitable distribution of financial resources, grantee eligibility, capacity building and outreach for the new Environmental and Climate Justice Program at EPA, which will distribute $3 billion in Inflation Reduction Act funding through grants and technical assistance. And so Brianna is going to be sending around in the chat a Google Doc where we're collecting ASAP member insights to inform our RFI. And we're so thankful to Shannon Burke, who is leading our RFI development process. And so Shannon will be summarizing all of those insights, and we'll be collaboratively putting together our response to that RFI. And input is due from ASAP members on March 9th. So please do click the link and share your input by March 9th. Join us at an upcoming policy practice group meeting. And then finally, ASAP hosts a whole set of other peer learning groups, and we would love for you to join us at one of those as well. You can see the topics listed on the left, and Brianna is going to be sending around in the chat a link to the ASAP calendar, where you can really easily see all of our upcoming peer learning group meetings and much more. If you're not an ASAP member yet, we really encourage you to join us. Membership is $150 a year or $50 for students. We also have a pay what you can program, so you can choose whatever amount fits into your budget. And if you appreciated the work that we're doing here at ASAP and you appreciated this meeting today, you can always donate, and the QR code is right there on your screen if you'd like to make a donation today. And with that, I want to give another huge thank you to Angie for organizing our conversation today. A huge thank you to Marissa for being our featured speaker, to all the policy practice group leaders for your ongoing leadership of our work advocating for transformational policy here at ASAP, and of course to the wonderful ASAP staff team who really make the wheels keep turning here at ASAP. And finally, thank you all for being here with us. We look forward to seeing you at another meeting soon. Have a great day, everyone.